The signal came at 3 in the morning when Commander Elena Vasquez was dreaming of her childhood home in Barcelona. Her communicator screamed with the priority alert that meant only one thing, and she was on her feet before her eyes fully opened. "Commander, to the bridge immediately," the voice said, and there was something in that voice she had never heard before: fear. Elena ran through the corridors of the UN. Perseverance, and her boots echoed against metal floors that had carried her across 3 oceans in 15 years of service. When she reached the bridge, she found her entire senior staff already there, and every single one of them was staring at the main display screen with expressions that made her stomach turn cold. "What am I looking at?" she demanded. Lieutenant Park turned to face her, and his young face had gone pale as paper. "Deep Watch picked it up 6 hours ago, Commander," he said, and his voice trembled just slightly. "Something hit the ocean floor in the Mariana Trench region, and it is not natural." Elena stepped closer to the screen and studied the sonar image that glowed blue and green in the darkness of the bridge. The object was massive, and it stretched across the ocean floor like a fallen giant. "How big?" she asked. 800 meters long, Commander," Park answered. "Give or take." Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet, because 800 meters was longer than any ship ever built by human hands, and it was sitting 11,000 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. "What else do we know?" The ship's science officer, Dr. Amara, stepped forward, and she was clutching a tablet so hard her knuckles had turned white. "The readings make no sense, Commander," Amara said. "The HULL is composed of materials that do not match anything in our database, and I mean anything at all." "Explain that to me." "The molecular structure is completely alien," Amara continued. "Not just unusual or rare, but genuinely not from Earth, and possibly not from anywhere in our solar system." The bridge went silent, and Elena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "There is more," Amara said quietly. "The object has 0 thermal signature despite sitting directly on top of active volcanic vents, and our sonar is not bouncing back properly." "What do you mean, not bouncing back?" "The hull is absorbing it, Commander," Amara said, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper, like it was designed to hide. Elena stood very still and let the information wash over her. Somewhere in the deepest part of the ocean, there was something that should not exist. And it was 800 meters of impossible, sitting in the darkness where no human had ever gone. "Get me Admiral Chan," she said finally. "Priority 1, and tell him we have a situation." 3 hours later, Elena was staring at a video feed of the Admiral himself, and his face was grim as she had ever seen it. "I have already spoken with the Council, Commander," Chun said. "They are authorizing the largest deep-sea recovery operation in human history, and you will be leading it." "Sir, with respect, we do not even know what this thing is." "That is exactly why we need to bring it up," Chun replied. "Whatever fell from the stars, Elena, we need to understand it before anyone else does." The Admiral leaned closer to his camera, and his eyes were intense. "I am giving you 3 Leviathan-class salvage vessels and every autonomous diving unit we have that can survive those depths," he said. "The whole world is going to be watching this, Commander, so do not let me down." The connection ended, and Elena turned back to her crew. "You heard the Admiral," she said. "Let us go fishing." The next 6 weeks were the most exhausting of Elena's life. The recovery fleet assembled above the coordinates, and the 3 massive Leviathan vessels formed a triangle around the target zone. Autonomous diving units descended into the black water one after another, and their cameras sent back images that made hardened sailors gasp and scientists weep with wonder. The spacecraft was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Its hull was smooth and black as obsidian, and it curved in ways that seemed to defy geometry itself. Strange symbols covered its surface, and they seemed to shift and change whenever the cameras looked directly at them. But it was the damage that made Elena's blood-run cold scorch marks ran along the entire length of the ship, and great gouges had been torn in the hull near what might have been engine ports. "Those are weapon impacts," her tactical officer said, and his voice was hollow. "Commander, that ship was running from something." Elena stared at the images and felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Or someone," she said quietly. The news spread across Earth like wildfire, and within days every broadcast channel was showing the same footage. Governments held emergency sessions, and religious leaders called for prayer, and scientists argued about what it all meant. Some people celebrated the discovery as proof that humanity was not alone in the universe. Others looked at those scorch marks and wondered what kind of weapon could do that to a ship 800 meters long. Elena wondered too. She lay awake at night and stared at the ceiling of her cabin and thought about what it meant that something so powerful had come to Earth. Had it come here on purpose, or had it simply fallen out of the sky like a wounded bird seeking any safe harbor? And the question that haunted her most of all, what had it been running from? The diving units continued their surveys, and each day brought new mysteries. The ship had no visible propulsion system that matched any human theory of space travel. Its hull was completely seamless, with no welding marks or joints or any sign of how it had been constructed. And deep within its structure, the sensors detected something that should have been impossible power. "It is faint, Commander," Amara reported, "barely above background radiation, but it is definitely there. The ship still has power after sitting on the ocean floor." "It appears so," Amara said, and she looked both terrified and excited. "Whatever power source they used, it is still functioning after what could be centuries or even longer." Elena made her decision. "Tell Admiral Chen we are ready to begin the recovery operation," she said. "Whatever this thing is, we are bringing it home." She did not know then how much those words would change everything. She did not know that the ship was not as dead as it appeared, and she certainly did not know that somewhere in the cold darkness of the ocean floor, something inside that ancient vessel had detected their presence, and it was beginning to wake up. The first attempt to raise the spacecraft failed on a Tuesday morning when the primary lifting cable snapped like thread under impossible weight. Elena watched from the bridge of the Perseverance as millions of dollars worth of equipment tumbled into the abyss and vanished into darkness that no light could penetrate. "Total loss, Commander," Lieutenant Park reported, and his voice was flat with exhaustion. The cables could not handle the stress. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "How heavy is this thing?" she asked. Dr. Amara pulled up the calculations on her tablet, and her face was grim. "Our best estimate is 2.3 million metric tons, Commander," she said. "That is heavier than anything we have ever tried to move in human history." "Then we need a new approach," Elena said. "Get me Dr. Tanaka on the line." Yuki Tanaka was the most brilliant engineer Elena had ever met, and she had been working on deep-sea construction for 20 years when her face appeared on the screen. She was already smiling that dangerous smile that meant she had an idea. "Commander Vasquez," Tanaka said, "I have been watching your attempts, and I think I know what went wrong." "Please enlighten me, Doctor." "You were trying to lift the ship," Tanaka explained. "But at that depth, with that weightlifting is impossible, even with our best technology. So, what do you suggest?" Tanaka's smile grew wider. "We do not lift it, Commander," she said. "We make it float." The plan was audacious, and Elena loved it immediately. Tanaka proposed using a new type of syntactic foam that her team had developed for deep-sea habitats. The foam could be injected into sealed chambers and would expand with incredible buoyancy, even at crushing depths, combined with a network of electromagnetic tethers that would guide the vessel upward in controlled stages. They might just be able to bring the ship to the surface. "It will take weeks," Tanaka warned, "maybe months, and we will need to do it slowly to avoid structural damage." "I do not care how long it takes," Elena replied. Just tell me it will work." "It should work, Commander," Tanaka said. "In theory, anyway." Theory was all they had. The second attempt began 3 weeks later after Tanaka and her team had arrived with enough equipment to fill 2 cargo ships, autonomous. Units descended once again, and this time they carried injection systems. Loaded with the experimental foam, Elena watched the camera feeds as the units approached the alien hull and began searching for entry points. "Commander, we have a problem," one of the technicians reported. "The hull is completely seamless, and we cannot find anywhere to inject the foam." Elena felt her heart sink. "There must be something," she said. "Keep looking." Hours passed, and then days, and the diving units crawled across every meter of that massive ship without finding a single opening. The international community began to question the operation, and news channels ran stories about the billions being spent on what some call the fool's errand. Politicians demanded answers, and Elena had none to give. On the 14th day, everything changed. "Commander, you need to see this," Amara said, and there was something strange in her voice. Lina hurried to the science station and looked at the readings. Amara was pointing to the hull. "Temperature is rising," Amara said. "It is subtle but definitely measurable." "Rising from what?" "I do not know, but it started about 6 hours ago, and it has been climbing steadily ever since." Elena stared at the data and felt a chill despite the warmth of the bridge. "Is the ship doing something?" "I think," Amara paused and chose her words carefully, "I think the ship is responding to our presence, Commander." As if to confirm her words, the next camera feed showed something impossible. Seams were appearing in the hull where none had existed before. Panels that had been fused together for who knew how long were slowly separating and revealing dark chambers beneath. "It is opening for us," Elena whispered. The injection process began immediately, and Tanaka's foam flooded into the newly revealed chambers with incredible precision. Day after day, the diving units worked, and day after day, the ship rose incrementally. From the ocean floor, the electromagnetic tethers hummed with power as they guided the massive vessel upward through water that grew lighter and warmer with every passing hour. On the 17th day, Elena stood on the deck of the Perseverance with every member of her crew. The sun was setting, and the ocean was painted in shades of gold and crimson, and the water began to move. It started as a gentle swelling and then grew into a massive dome of displaced ocean. Elena held her breath. The spacecraft broke the surface like a whale breaching after a long dive. Water cascaded from its black hull in waterfalls that caught the dying sunlight and turned to rainbow. Strange organisms from the deep clung to its surface, and they glowed with bioluminescent light that made the ship look like it was covered in stars. Elena heard her crew gasping and crying and laughing all at once. She heard Dr. Tanaka shouting in triumph over the radio. She heard Admiral Chun's voice crackling through the speakers, congratulating everyone involved, but Elena herself was silent. She could only stare at this impossible, beautiful thing that they had pulled from the darkness. "We did not just recover a ship," she said finally, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "We resurrected one." As if in answer, the ship's hull began to glow more brightly. Systems that had been dormant for centuries were coming online. Lights flickered across its surface in patterns that might have been language or might have been something else entirely. And deep within the vessel, hidden from every sensor and camera, a single pod began to draw power for the first time in 300 years. Its occupant had been waiting in the cold dark for so very long, but now it was time to wake up. The spacecraft now rested in a massive dry dock on Midway Atoll, and the facility had been transformed into the most secure research station on Earth. They called it Research Station Prometheus, after the Titan who brought fire to humanity. Elena thought the name was appropriate because whatever secrets this ship held, they would change everything. Scientists arrived from every nation, and they came with equipment and theories and endless questions. Dr. Samuel Okonkwo came from Nigeria. With his team of linguists and pattern recognition specialists, Dr. Tanaka stayed to study the engineering. Xenobiologists and physicists and military specialists filled every building on the island, and still the ship sat silent and waiting. "The symbols are driving me insane," Okonkwo admitted one evening as he and Elena shared coffee on the observation deck. He was pointing at the alien writing that covered the hull and seemed to shift whenever you looked directly at it. "What do?" "You mean, they are not letters, Commander," he said. "At least not in any way we understand letters." "Then, what are they?" Okonkwo set down his cup, and his eyes were troubled. "I think they are warnings," he said. "The patterns repeat in ways that suggest urgency and danger, but I cannot crack the actual meaning." Elena looked at the ship and felt that familiar chill run through her. "Keep working on it," she said. "We need to know what they were trying to tell us." The breakthrough came 3 days later. Okonkwo's team had been broadcasting mathematical sequences at the ship on every frequency they could generate. Prime numbers and geometric progressions and the fundamental constants of the universe on the morning of the 4th day. The ship answered. The primary airlocks cycled open with a hiss of ancient air, and every alarm on the station began screaming at once. "We have atmosphere exchange," Tanaka reported. "The air inside is breathable, but stale like it has been sealed." For a very long time, Elena suited up with the boarding team and checked her equipment. 3 times, remember, she told her people. "We do not know what we are going to find in there, so stay alert and stay together." The airlock led to a corridor that stretched into darkness, and the walls were smooth and black and covered in more of those shifting symbols. Emergency lights activated as they walked, and it was as if the ship knew they were there and was trying to help. "This is incredible," Tanaka whispered. "The power systems are still functioning after centuries." They moved deeper into the vessel and found chambers filled with equipment they could not identify. They found what might have been a medical bay, and what might have been an engine room, and what was definitely a bridge of some kind, and then they found the bodies. Elena stopped breathing when the first one came into view. It was unlike anything she had ever imagined. The being was humanoid in basic shape, but its body seemed to be made of something like living crystal. Its skin was translucent, and beneath it, Elena could see structures that might have been organs or might have been machinery. There were hundreds of them throughout the ship, and they were all perfectly preserved in some kind of amber fluid that had long since failed to sustain them. "They died at their stations," Okonkwo said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "They died fighting." Elena looked at the frozen faces of these alien beings and saw something she recognized in their expressions: determination. These creatures, whoever they had been, had fought to the very end. The central chamber was different from the rest of the ship. It was circular and domed, and the walls were covered not with symbols, but with images. Images of worlds and stars and beings of every imaginable shape. Images of cities and forests and oceans that existed under alien suns. And in the center of the chamber was a single pod that glowed with soft amber light. "Commander," Tanaka called out. "This one is still active." Elena approached the pod and looked through its transparent surface. Inside, floating in that gentle light, was a being much smaller than the others. Its crystalline structure was more delicate, and its features were softer somehow. A child, Elena realized. This was a child. "The pod is drawing power from somewhere," Tanaka reported. "The stasis system is still fully functional." Elena reached out and touched the surface of the pod, and it was warm beneath her fingers. "There is something else, Commander," Okonkwo said from across the chamber. "You need to see this." He was standing before a section of wall where words had been carved directly into the metal. Not symbols this time, but actual words in a script that seemed designed to be translated. Okonkwo held up his tablet, and the translation software worked for several long moments. Then he read the words aloud, and his voice shook. "To whoever finds her," he read, "she carries the memory of worlds, and you must protect her because they are coming." The chamber fell silent. Elena looked at the child in the pod, and then at the hundreds of dead crew members who had given everything to bring her here. "Who is coming?" she asked quietly. As if in answer, the pod began to hum with new energy. Lights flickered across its surface, and the amber fluid began to drain away. "Nobody touch anything," Elena ordered, but it was already too late. The awakening sequence had begun, and there was no way to stop it. The child's eyes opened, and Elena found herself staring into depths that held the light of dying stars. Those eyes were ancient and young at the same time. Those eyes had seen things no human could imagine, and those eyes were looking directly at her. "You found me," the child said, and somehow Elena understood every word. "After so long, someone finally found me." Elena knelt beside the pod and did something that surprised even herself. She reached out and took the child's hand. "Yes," she said, "we found you and you are safe now." The child smiled, and it was the saddest smile Elena had ever seen. "Safe," the child repeated. "No one is safe, and that is why I am here." "What do you mean?" The child squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "I need to show you something," she said. "I need to show you what is coming for all of us." Her name was Kefira, and she was 312 years old by her people's counting. By human standards, she was barely an adolescent, and yet she carried within her mind the entire history of a civilization that had spanned 10,000 worlds. Dr. Tanaka's team spent 2 months building a neural interface that could connect Kefira's crystalline consciousness to human technology. When it was finally ready, Elena gathered with a select group of scientists and military leaders in a chamber deep within Research Station Prometheus. "I will show you what I remember," Kefira said, and her voice had grown stronger in the weeks since her awakening. "But I warn you that these memories are not easy to witness." Elena nodded and placed the interface band around her temples. "Show us." The world dissolved, and Elena found herself standing on an alien world beneath. A sky of purple and gold cities rose around her with architecture that seemed to grow from the ground like living things. Beings like Kefira walked through streets of crystal and light, and they were laughing and talking and living their lives. "This was Vanter Prime," Kefira's voice said, "the heart of our civilization and the world where I was born." The scene shifted, and Elena saw Vantari ships sailing between stars. She saw them making contact with other species and sharing knowledge and art and friendship. She saw them building wonders that defied imagination. "We were explorers and scientists and poets," Kefira continued. "We had charted 10,000 worlds and made peace with 100 different species." The memories grew warmer, and Elena felt the love the Vanthari had for their civilization. She felt their pride in what they had built. She felt their hope for the future, and then everything changed. The purple sky turned red, and fire fell from above. Elena watched in horror as Vanthari cities burned, and as ships that dwarfed anything she had ever seen descended from orbit. "The hierarchy found Zeus," Kefira said, and her voice was hollow with ancient grief. "They are a coalition of species, so old that they remember when the first stars were born." Elena saw the attackers, and they were nightmares given form. Some were massive creatures of metal and flesh that seemed to have been built for war. Others were clouds of darkness that consumed everything they touched. And leading them were beings of cold intelligence who watched the destruction with expressions of complete indifference. "Why?" Elena asked. "Why did they attack you?" "Because we were growing," Kefira answered. "We had begun to develop faster than light travel, and we were becoming mobile." The memories showed her the truth. The hierarchy believed that younger species were dangerous. They believed that civilizations needed to be destroyed before they could mature and challenge the established order. The Vanthari's crime was simply existing and having the potential to become powerful. "The war lasted 3 days, Kefira said. 3 days to destroy 40,000 years of civilization. Elena watched worlds burn. She watched entire populations vanish in flashes of terrible light. She watched the Vanthari fight back with everything they had, and she watched them lose, and then she saw something else. She saw a ship being loaded in secret while the final battles raged above. She saw children being carried aboard by parents who knew they would never see them again. She saw a young Kathira crying as her mother placed a hand on her cheek and said goodbye. The last whisper was our final hope, Kathira explained. We gathered the children of our greatest minds, and we downloaded everything we knew into their crystalline matrices. You carry the memory of your entire civilization. Yes, Kathira said. Every scientific discovery and every work of art and every song ever sung on Vanthar Prime now exists only in my mind. The scene shifted again, and Elena saw the last whisper fleeing through space. She saw hierarchy ships in pursuit, and she saw the desperate battle that followed. She saw the damage that tore through the hull and killed crew members at their stations. We had nowhere to go, Kathira said. The hierarchy controlled most of the galaxy, and they were hunting us. How did you end up on Earth? The answer made Elena's blood run cold. The hierarchy had catalogued your world centuries ago, Kathira explained. They decided you were too primitive to be a threat, and they ignored you. They know about us. They know about everyone, Kathira said. They watch all the young species, and they wait for them to develop enough to be dangerous. And then they destroy them. Yes, the memories faded, and Elena found herself back in the chamber with tears streaming down her face. Admiral Chen was pale and shaking beside her. How long do we have, he asked, before they come for us? Kathira looked at him with those ancient young eyes. By your calendar, perhaps 50 years, she said. Perhaps less depending on when their scouts return to check on your progress. 50 years, Chen repeated. That is not enough time. No, Kathira agreed. It is not. Elena stood and walked to where Kathira sat small and fragile in her chair. There has to be something we can do, she said. Your people. We're scientists and engineers, and surely they left us something we can use. Kathira smiled, and it was the first real smile Elena had seen from her. My people knew they were dying, Commander, she said. They knew the last whisper might not survive. And they knew that even if it did, whoever found us would be facing the same enemy. What are you saying? Kathira reached out and touched Elena's hand. The ship's databanks contain everything my people ever learned about technology, she said. Faster than light drives and energy shields and weapons that could crack moons. Elena felt her heart begin to race. Everything, Kathira confirmed. My people died so that whoever found me might have a chance to live. She squeezed Elena's hand. Tyre, you have 50 years, Commander, she said. I suggest you use them wisely because when the hierarchy comes, they will not show mercy. Elena looked at Admiral Chen and saw the same determination in his eyes that she felt in her heart. Contact every government on Earth, she said. Tell them what we are facing, and tell them what we have to work with. And what do we tell them about our chances? Elena thought about the Vanthari and their beautiful civilization that had been reduced to ashes. She thought about the hundreds of dead crew members who had given everything to bring one child and her precious cargo to Earth. She thought about humanity with all its flaws and all its potential. Tell them we have work to do, she said, and tell them that humanity does not go quietly into the night. 50 years had passed since Commander Elena Vasquez pulled an alien spacecraft from the bottom of the ocean. 50 years of work and sacrifice and transformation that had changed humanity forever. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Kathira and looked out at the fleet that hung in formation around her flagship. 2,000 ships filled the space between Earth and Mars, and every single one of them was a miracle of human determination and Vanthari wisdom. Elena was 94 years old now, and her body was sustained by medical technology that the Vanthari had developed over millennia. Her hair had turned silver, and her face bore the lines of a life spent preparing for this moment, but her eyes were still sharp, and her mind was still clear, and her heart still beat with the same fire that had driven her all those years ago. Admiral, her tactical officer, reported. Long-range sensors have detected a hierarchy scout entering the outer solar system. Elena nodded, and felt no fear at all. Track it, she ordered. But do not engage yet, decided her ambassador. Kathira watched the sensor display with ancient eyes. She was no longer the frightened child who had awakened in a strange ship surrounded by strange beings. 5 decades among humans had transformed her into a leader and a teacher and a bridge between two civilizations. They will be surprised, Kathira said quietly. The hierarchy expected to find primitives burning fossil fuels and fighting among themselves. They were not entirely wrong about the fighting, Elena admitted. Getting humanity to work together was almost harder than building the fleet. Kathira smiled at that. The years after first contact had been chaotic and terrifying, and wonderful all at once. Governments had argued, and populations had panicked, and some had refused to believe the threat was real. But in the end, humanity had done what it always did when faced with extinction. It adapted the Vantari technology. It seemed like magic at first, but human engineers had thrown themselves at it with a passion that amazed even Kathira. Within 5 years, they had built their first functional faster-than-light drive. Within 10 years, they had established colonies on 3 worlds. Within 20 years, they had begun reaching out to the other victims of the hierarchy who had been hiding in the dark spaces between stars. The alliance had grown slowly at first. Species that had survived by staying invisible were naturally suspicious of a young civilization that wanted to fight back, but humanity's stubborn refusal to accept the inevitable had been contagious. Now 37 species stood together under a common banner. 37 civilizations that had each lost everything to the hierarchy, had found hope in a small blue world that refused to be afraid. The scout is accelerating, the tactical officer reported. It appears to be attempting to leave the system. It has seen our fleet, Elena said. It knows something is wrong. She straightened in her chair and gave the order she had been waiting 50 years to give. All ships engage at will, she commanded. Do not let that scout escape. The space around the fleeing hierarchy vessel erupted in weapons fire. Human ships moved with precision that would have been impossible a century ago. Energy beams designed from Vantari, schematics and improved by human ingenuity, tore through shields that had once seemed invincible. The scout was destroyed in exactly 3 milliseconds, but not before it sent a single panic transmission back to its masters. They are awake. Elena allowed herself a small smile. They know we are coming, Kathira said. Good, Elena replied. I want them to know, and I want them to be afraid. The hierarchy response came 3 months later. 10,000 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system, and they darkened the stars with their numbers. Elena looked at the stars with their numbers, another sensor display, and felt her heart pound in her chest. This was the moment that everything had been building toward. This was the test that would determine whether 50 years of work had been enough. All ships to battle stations, she ordered. Signal the Alliance fleet to form up on our position. The human fleet moved like a single organism, and they arranged themselves in formations that human tacticians had developed by studying Vantari military theory around them. The ships of 37 other species took their places, former slaves and refugees and survivors who had each lost their homes to the enemy they now faced together. Admiral Chun's voice crackled over the command frequency from his position aboard the UN Perseverance. Admiral Vasquez, the fleet is ready, he said. What are your orders? Elena looked at Kathira one last time. The Vantari ambassador nodded, and her crystalline features caught the light of distant stars. My people believed they could hide from the hierarchy, she said. They were wrong, but you were different. How so? Kathira's smile was fierce and proud. You do not hide, she said. You fight. Elena turned back to the tactical display and opened a channel to the entire fleet. This is Admiral Vasquez to all ships, she said. 50 years ago, we pulled a dying vessel from the bottom of our ocean, and we found a child who carried the memory of a murdered civilization. She paused and let her words sink in. The Vanthari gave us everything. They had, she continued, their knowledge and their technology and their hope for a future they would never see. Her voice grew stronger. Today we honor that gift, and today we show the hierarchy that the universe is not theirs to control. She stood from her chair and looked out at the stars. We found their victims and we learned their names, and we carry their memories, she declared. And now we are coming for them. The fleet surged forward, and the battle that followed would be sung about for 10,000 years. It was not easy, and it was not quick. Ships were destroyed on both sides, and lives were lost that could never be replaced. But for the first time in millions of years, the hierarchy faced an enemy that would not break. They faced an alliance of species, united by loss and strengthened by hope. They faced humanity. When it was over, the hierarchy fleet was scattered and running. Their commanders could not understand what had happened. They had come expecting to crush a primitive species, and instead they had found warriors. Elena watched the enemy retreat and felt tears running down her face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of triumph. We did it, she whispered. We actually did it. Kathira placed a hand on her shoulder. This is not the end, Admiral, she said. The hierarchy will return with more ships and more weapons. I know, Elena said. But today, we showed them something important. What is that? Elena smiled. We showed them that we are not afraid. On Earth, in a museum built around the restored hull of the Last Whisper, a young human girl stood before a holographic display of the Vantari civilization. Her teacher, an AI built from Vanthari, and human code floated beside her. What did you learn? Today, the teacher asked. The girl thought carefully, and her face was scrunched up with concentration. That the universe is really big, she said, and really scary. Is that all? The girl grinned, and it was the same fierce grin that Admiral Vasquez wore on the bridge of her flagship. Also that it picked the wrong planet to mess with. The teacher laughed, and it was a sound like crystal bells. Somewhere far away, Admiral Elena Vasquez was addressing the united governments of 37 worlds. She was tired and wounded and older than she had ever imagined being. But she was also proud. This is just the beginning, she told them. The hierarchy has ruled through fear for millions of years, but today we showed them something new. She raised her fist and her voice rang out across the stars. We showed them hope, and in the darkness between galaxies, the masters of the hierarchy heard the message that humanity had broadcast. On every frequency, we found your victims, we learned their names. We carry their memories, and we are coming for you. For the first time in their ancient existence, the hierarchy knew what it was to be afraid, because humanity had arrived, and humanity did not know how to quit.